As an Oakland slash Los Angeles slash San Antonio Raiders fan my entire life, going back to the days of Tecmo Super Bowl and the unstoppable tandem with Marcus Allen and Bo Jackson. Last season was one of the absolute worst. I mean, statistically, the Raiders have had worse season. They went 2-14 before, but last year you just thought they were going to turn a corner with Derek Carr and Khalil Mack, and they did pretty impressively on their rookie season. Just overall, the team just played absolutely horribly. I think if you want to see everything that went wrong with the team, you have to go back to the very first game of the year, the game against the Jets, where they just could not get the ball going whatsoever. And obviously, you look at the 2014, 2015, 3-13 Raiders squad, and it's pretty obvious what the problem is. I'm throwing a couple of statistics here for you. It's offense. 32nd in total yards, 32nd in first downs, 26th in passing, 32nd in rushing. They had Darren McFadden last year, so that explains that dismal number. And 28th in receiving yards. Now, historically, the Raiders, going back to the Rich Gannon days, and even going back to the Bruce Gradkowski, Jason Campbell days, they were very much a run-oriented, run-to-shoot. Obviously, you didn't really have the weapons like Jerry Rice and Tim Brown with guys like, Jerron Kreiner and Rod Streeter. Even though Rod Streeter actually is pretty good. I mean, he's not elite. Don't give him too much credit. He is pretty decent, if it's not a little underrated. So, looking at this, the problems are pretty much all across the board. The offense is in complete disarray. You got a new offensive coordinator in Mike Tice. You got Del Rio coming in. Maybe he's going to do some stuff. He made wonders happen in Jacksonville somehow. He's up there in Denver. So, you look at that pedigree, this has to be a much, much improved offense. I think they did very, very good in the offseason, getting some great wide receiver acquisitions. I think Derek Carr, he threw 21 touchdowns last year, 12 interceptions, a little over 3,000 yards. He's going to be much improved just because he has far, far more weapons. Now, speaking of weapons, preview 2015 Raiders. This is what I think the offensive starters are going to look like. Not a whole lot of surprises here, although I think there might be a little bit of a controversy at certain depth positions. Beginning of the quarterback, it's going to be Derek Carr. Dude played 16 games last year. He started off slow, but he actually warmed up and looked pretty good. The funny thing about the Raiders is, as bad as they were last year, you look at some teams they played, and they did have statistically the hardest schedule in the NFL last year. I mean, they did pretty well against some great teams. They hung in there against Seattle. They had a close one against New England, the inevitable Super Bowl champions. When I say inevitable, perhaps I meant the eventual. It's not Freudian or anything. Sorry to deflate you early in the morning. But yeah, Derek Carr, he's going to be much improved. As far as his cutting down his touchdown to interception ratio, I think it's going to be a little bit higher. But of course, he's got the weapons. That's going to be the big thing. He might be able to kind of upgrade his stats by maybe 10 touchdowns this year, I think, which is really the biggest addition to the Raiders' offense. Obviously, is the receiving core, and you've got a very, very good lineup here. You've got Amari Cooper coming in, and I think really what the Raiders want to hope to happen here is that Derek Carr to Amari Cooper is going to be your new Matt Stafford to Megatron. I think they have a very, very similar tandem aspect there that I think they could sort of capitalize on. And I think we're going to see probably, double-digit connections. I think we're going to have at least 10 touchdowns for Cooper from Carr, and, maybe a couple more with the other big acquisition from San Francisco, Michael Crabtree. So I think these guys, without question, will be your two starters. And you look at the back, they also have two other very, very talented receivers, Rod Streeter and Michael Rivera. And I think Michael Rivera is actually probably going to switch from a tight end to a actual standard receiver unit because you've got Clive Walford coming in from Miami, and he's really great. He's going to be a very, very solid tight end. I think he's better at playing defense, is the guarding position, and receiving, so he's going to get the nod, and they'll just put Rivera perhaps on second team. So yeah, quarterback is going to be much improved. Wide receiving unit has to be improved. But, really, what does that matter when you have a really bad O-line? And I think that was just the huge, gigantic, glaring problem last year with the Raiders. They just couldn't get anything done. They could not get guys past the O-line. The front five to make it push through. Defense is cutting through them. That was really the biggest offensive problem of the Raiders last year. And I think they've kind of gone out there and in the draft and some free agent acquisition, they've done a lot to, I think, improve the front five. Now, I'm not saying that you have a Pro Bowl caliber front five, because you don't. I still think you're missing maybe 2 or 3 positions, but so far I'm really impressed with what we have here. Of course, they went out and spent all that money on Rodney Hudson, and he's better be playing like a great center like he did for Kansas City all those years. You got Feliciano picked up in the draft. I think he's going to be very good. So you have 2 very, very sterling new additions to the team. I think they're going to play fantastically. Really, you don't have a whole lot to work with the rest of the O-line. But, looking at Donald Penn, Austin Howard, Gabe Jackson, that's probably the best of the crew that you have. Now, do I think this is going to be a team that's going to completely turn things around offensively with this line? Absolutely not. I still think we're maybe probably a draft away from having a very, very solid offensive line. But, it's much improved from last year. There's no way to say it isn't. So it's still a weakness. It's going to give us some problems, but it's going to at least give Derek Carr and a little bit more time. And, of course, the big thing here is the problem, and obviously as you can tell by the 32nd in rushing yards, was that the running backs last year, of course, you had a Run DMC who was INJURED for most of the season. And, you had George Atkinson, just a really terrible running back by committee set up last year, with the exception of one guy, Latavius Murray, and that game against Kansas City made me a believer. If we can get this guy healthy and he goes out there and he plays, and of course that's really a big if, because running backs get hurt very easily, especially playing out there in the AFC West. I think he's going to be very solid, and with the improved O-line, I think he's going to have a little bit more of an opportunity to get the maximum yardage. So as long as he can stay healthy, and I think he will, I think he's played at least 8 games this year, he's going to be a big asset for the Raiders. Pulling in his fullback, the Raiders, the offensive strategy is kind of phase out that position altogether. Marcel Reese has been probably the most consistent running back that the Raiders have had for the last 5 years. I think he has a solid FB position, and what will probably be the last season the Raiders employ that as part of their offense. And really, looking at the rest of the running backs, it's not a bad lineup. You've got, oh goodness, I forget his name. You got Tawan Jones. You got Trent Richardson, who's really do or die, so he's pretty much playing money ball at this point. So I think pretty much across the board, it's very, very improved. I think the wide receivers are going to give Derek Carr a chance to kind of open up and get a whole lot more touchdowns than he did last year. An improved O-line is going to help the run game out, and hopefully, with a decent enough O-line, they can stay healthy, they can be just maybe like 10% better than they were last year. This is going to be an offense that can finally get things going. I still think we're a year away from really kind of reaching our potential, but really can't complain. Much, much, much better team offensively than it was last year. But of course, that's only one part of the equation. You also got to factor in something else. You got to factor in defense. And I was actually kind of surprised when I looked at the statistics, because I thought maybe in my heightened hindsight biased mind that the Raiders' offense actually fared better than the defense last year. But actually, the Raiders' defense last year, not great, but not terrible either. 21st in total yards allowed, 18th in first downs allowed, 16th in pass defense, 22nd in run defense, and what really shocked me, they were 13th in receiving yards allowed. So I went into this video kind of saying, obviously, you look at the secondary on the defense of the Raiders, and that's the biggest weakness, but statistically, that's actually their strongest suit. So I'm really kind of taken aback by those numbers. So defense. Okay, I think this is going to be a fairly improved defense, certainly in certain regards. Front four, Justin Tuck, Justin Ellis. You got Williams, and you got Mario Edwards Jr. coming in the draft from Miami. I think it's going to be a much improved front four. But really, you talk about the Raiders, you talk about the linebacker core, because this is shaping up to be a very, very solid Pro Bowl caliber offensive line unit. You've got Khalil Mack, obviously. He's probably going to have a Pro Bowl year. C.O. Moore, I think, is very underrated, who is a very, very good tandem linebacker with Khalil Mack. And you're bringing in Curtis Lofton. This is actually probably going to be, in my humble opinion, the best offensive linebacking crew you're going to have in the AFC West, maybe one of the best in the AFC. So this, when you look at all of the shining beacons that you could have for the Raiders, this is probably the one aspect of the team I think is just the absolute best you're going to get a lot of results out of these guys. These guys are going to earn their money. With an improved front four, I think they're going to be much, much better at stopping the run. And traditionally, the Raiders have actually played a whole lot better against rushing teams than they have against the pass-heavy teams. Because really, you look at last year's, it's the gunslingers that did the most damage to the Raiders. It's the Broncos, it's San Diego, teams like, Green Bay, and who else? Who else is going? Indianapolis. I can't even fathom what they would do to last year's offensive secondary. But yeah, running, they're going to be much improved on the run defense. That pretty much goes without saying. The secondary, like I said, this is still the part of the team, offense and defense combined, where I'm just kind of like going, this is where I'm really kind of having my apprehensions about. Charles Woodson is their best player in the secondary. He's definitely going to be a Hall of Famer for the Raiders. Maybe not Hall of Famer. He's going to be in the Ring of Honor. But maybe not the actual Pro Football Hall of Fame. But, when the fact of the matter is, when a guy you drafted in 1998 is your best player in the secondary, you got some problems. I mean, it's probably going to be his final year, and we appreciate everything he does, and he's still playing at a really high level. But, you really got to have a really good safety unit. You got to have killer cornerbacks. You don't have those shutdowns in the Raiders. And I think that's their big defensive weakness. I'm expecting DJ Hayden, TJ Carey to be your corners, Nate Allen, Charles Woodson playing safety. So, I mean, really, you look at that, and you got the Broncos, you got the Chargers, you got the Chiefs, all these very, very pass-happy teams in the AFC West. I think that's going to give the Raiders a lot of problems. But rushing defense, much improved. Pass defense, probably slightly better than last year. So, that's going to be a problem. Hate to be the bearer of bad news. So, all that. We know the areas where the Raiders really needed help last year. We saw where they were deficient. We saw their free agent acquisitions. We saw what they did in the draft. We saw where they bolt up, what the stars are going to look like. And I think with all that combined, with a beefed up defensive line, with a much, much better receiving crew, an entirely new and better running back committee, Derek Carr is going to have more numbers, a better rushing defense. I think the Raiders are going to be improved. They're going to win probably at least double as many games as they did last year. Playoffs, probably a bit too early, but I think they can go in there and they can play spoiler. And they can actually kind of put themselves in a quasi-decent condition next year. Mid-level draft pick, and I think 2015 is pretty much the start of something new. I think 2016 is the year they turn around and actually start getting into playoff contention. But there's some things to be optimistic about so far in 2015. First 2 games of the season is my prediction for all 17 games of the year. The very first game of the season against Cincinnati at OCO, and of course it's really entirely different than the video about where the Raiders end up at the end of the season as far as relocation. But actually I think the Raiders are going to be pretty good. Like I said, that's a very run-heavy team, and the Raiders traditionally, especially with the unit they have now, I think they're going to play quite well. So I think they end up winning that first game of the season. I think they actually go out and they win the second game of the season, too, against a Baltimore team which is in disarray, that's really trying to get their receiving unit back in line, that's having trouble with the rush. So I think the Raiders are going to shock everybody by going 2-0 to begin the season. They're playing at Cleveland. That's pretty much a traditional trap game. I think they lose that one. They're going to face an 0-2 Cleveland squad at that point, and the Raiders go in a heavy favorite, and they just kind of show some weaknesses. Might be a close game. I just got a feeling that's just a trap game. Trap games happen all the time. Smells like a trap game. Then they go at Soldier Field. I think the Bears they're certainly rebuilding at this point, and they're in worse shape than the Raiders are. Don't have much faith in Cutler. Their defense is not what it used to be. I think the Raiders win it. And they go in and they have their game against Denver at OCO. I think it's going to be a much closer game than we have seen in years past, but I still think Denver just has the offensive firepower. And once again, the Raiders secondary really can't do much to prevent it. So, going into Week 6, Raiders always have like an early bye. It's always like before, Halloween. They never get anything late in the season. So yeah, I think going into the bye week, they're actually going to have an above 500 record. They're going to be 3-2. Then they're playing at San Diego. I don't really like their odds there. Once again, they're going to get torched. They dropped to 500. Then they have the game against the New York Jets. I think that actually bodes well. It's a pretty good matchup. I'm not really sure what their quarterback's going to look like there in New York, but traditionally the Raiders have played well. I think it's a very good matchup. It's looking unit to unit, player to player. I think they win that one. They go to Heinz Field. Still going to be a much improved team this year. Probably going to win the AFC Central. I think the Raiders drop that one. Then they host the Vikings. They're going to have Adrian Peterson back. That's going to be a much improved team from last year. You're going to have Mike Tice facing his old team. I think it's going to be close, but I think the Raiders end up dropping that one. I think that's going to be the one game where the rushing defense just doesn't hold up for the Raiders. So at that point, you've had about, 9 games? That's the halfway point of the season. Raiders are 4-5 at that point. Then they're going to Detroit. I think Detroit's going to be a far worse team than they were last year. I think the Raiders win that one. Then they go to Tennessee. Tennessee might just be the worst team in the league. Worse than Jacksonville, worse than Washington, worse than Tampa Bay. I think the Raiders win that one. So, going into Week 13, really this is playoff weather. I got the Raiders at 6-5. So they're actually above 500 heading into the final 5 games of the year. And unfortunately, I think it's going to go down on a low note for all those games. Now, I think there's definitely a possibility that the Raiders can steal maybe 2 of these games, but it's doubtful. I always kind of go for the low ball estimate. Like I said, secondary, give me some problems. Kansas City not going to be as good as they were last year, but something they have enough gunslinging ability to win that game, especially, they have the later game at Arrowhead, but I think the game at OCO they're going to lose. No, I think that could be close. These games, they could go back and forth, but I'm always going to lean towards the negativity bias. Sorry, I'm prone to it. So I'm going to give them that. Playing at Mile High, Peyton Manning isn't going to be the Peyton Manning of old, but I still think he's going to have enough in his arm to get over the Raiders there. Green Bay probably going to win the Super Bowl this year. Raiders going to lose that one for sure. They're going to get stomped. And Chargers, unfortunately, I chalked that up as a loss too. In Kansas City, playing at Arrowhead, not really much to go. Oh, and okay, hold on, go back. This game right here, 16, I believe that's on Christmas Eve, or it might even be Christmas Day. I have to double check. But this very well could be the last game the Raiders play in Oakland ever. So keep that one on your docket. I think it's going to be kind of a low note for the franchise if they do not end up playing in Oakland in 2016. And the final one against Kansas City, I think they dropped that too. So it's really, you look at this, it's pretty disappointing, but considering as bad as the Reds have been playing, a 7-9 season is something to almost celebrate. I mean, they start off on a win streak. I think they end up going on a 5-game losing streak. I hate to be negative, but I'm playing with your head and not your heart. I'm a huge Raiders. I want them to go in there and surprise me and go 9-7, maybe even 10-6, but gotta err on the side of caution. And I think the Raiders are going to be an improved team. They're going to look good in certain games, but they're not there yet. So ultimately, in the day, I think they end up probably finishing 3rd in the AFC West, probably like 10th or 11th overall in the AFC. They missed the playoffs, but they do post a pretty decent 7-9 record. They show a lot of glimmers of hope. And then I think hopefully in the free agent period and the 2016 draft, that's when the Raiders bulk up their O-line. That's when they get some D-line acquisitions. That's when they really get their secondary in shape. And I think 2016 is a year where we flip-flop those numbers, where it goes from 7-9 to maybe 9-7, and we finally have the Raiders back in playoff contention. So all that said, a lot of negativity here, but once again, I think it's a much improved team. We're going to see a lot of optimistic spots. And really, when we look back on it, this is going to be the season where we say we saw that tangible change. We saw the new look Raiders. We saw the origin. We saw the genesis, and we know where this team is headed in the future. And if you're a Raiders fan, I think for the first time in a long time, guys, we're going to have something to smile about this autumn.